Hey guys, this is just going to serve as a very brief recap little tutorial on some kind of dominant or first or basic editing techniques and skills and tools within Adobe Photoshop as it relates to project number one, which works with photographic images that you have taken and are being asked to correctively edit and retouch in the Photoshop software for the submission of the project. That being said, I am just going to go through a handful, again, of very basic correctional editing and retouching tools within Photoshop. So we are here in the Photoshop program, and I am going to just go ahead and open up, let's see, an image that perhaps we can do some editing to. Okay, so I'm going to open this image here in Photoshop. Hopefully you have been working with the software and this looks familiar to you. So as I kind of addressed in the first tutorial, which was on using levels to adjust the exposure of an image, the first thing that you're going to want to do as you work with any images within the Photoshop software is over here in your layers panel. Oh, sorry, I need to, my crop tool is currently on. Over here in your layers panel with your background layer selected, you of course are going to duplicate that layer as a means to work losslessly. I encourage you to duplicate the layer every single time that you make any edits or adjustments to the image. So I'm just going to go ahead and allow the names for the layers to be whatever they are programmed to be. I'm just going to let this be background copy, so I'll go ahead and enter that. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to rerun really quickly on doing a levels adjustment. Again, the levels adjustment is a means to adjust the exposure of an image. When we say the exposure of an image, we are talking about how light or dark an image is. We're working with the black point of an image, which is where the shadows fall, the gray point of an image, which is where your midtones fall, and the white point of an image, which is where your highlights are. So to access your levels adjustments, you simply navigate up here in your menu to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. The Levels dialog box opens, and here again, I'm not going to do a thorough explanation. If you need to recap that, you can access the levels adjustment tutorial, which is also available on the Blackboard page. So again, I'm not going to go into extensive explanation of what I'm doing here. You can follow along with the understanding that you hopefully already watched that tutorial, but right now I am just looking for my white point. I can't really find a place that I would love to select, so I'm instead going to use my slider in terms of pulling up those highlights. So according to the graph, it wants me to pull them to about there. I think it probably depends on your particular aesthetic and eye. I tend to like a little bit of deeper shadows, but of course we still have that really light highlight popping there, which is really nice. So I will preview it from beginning to end. And again, it just kind of really enhanced those shadows and highlights and midtones. So that looks good for me in terms of an exposure adjustment. So I will just go ahead and click OK. The next thing that I think could be useful for you guys is, the next thing I guess I'll show you is how to crop an image, because I had discussed there may be times in which the composition that you've created, there might be something distracting in the image that you wish was not there, or you think would make a stronger composition without. So we'll go ahead and look at the crop tool next. Again, I am simply duplicating the layer every single time that I make an adjustment, so that if I want to, I can go back and undo it. So again, you control click. If you're working on a Mac, control click that layer, simply duplicate layer, and I'm just going to allow the names be whatever they default to in the Photoshop software. So if you come over here to your toolbar on the left, this is where all of your tools are. This is the tool menu. The crop tool is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the icon list. It looks like a square. So the crop tool is pretty self-explanatory. The singular thing that I would like to point out that is important, right here, if you come up to the dialog box where I'm not sure what it says, it might default to ratio. So I will briefly show you here, if you are simply on ratio, and you come over to one of your dragging points, you have free range to completely change the shape of this image, right? Typically, we do not want to do that. We typically want to remain with the original ratio in which the image was photographed. So what you can do to ensure that is you can drop down that dialog box to click on original ratio. So at this point in time, if you notice, as I drag, the image does not lose its original shape, so to speak. So say I think that that makes for a stronger composition. I can make my selection, maybe not so tight. Just say I didn't want the power lines. I like the power lines, but for the purposes of this exercise, let's say I didn't want the power lines. So I can go ahead and click enter on my keyboard to crop that in a little bit tighter. And over here, I'm back in the layer panel. If I want to preview any changes that I have made, cropping, I guess I should mention, does crop the original. So you can always undo by Command Z or edit undo. Sorry, I'm undoing these layer visibilities. If I go back to undo crop, that is how I would simply undo that. But again, for the purposes of this, I will leave it cropped a little tighter. Say, you know, this is what you think makes a stronger composition. The next thing that I want to show you, and again, I suggest duplicating your layer every single time that you adjust the image further. So the next thing that I'm going to show you is how to slightly rotate and or skew an image. Make sure that you are on your move tool, which is the first icon in the toolbar navigation. So with that selected, you can go ahead into edit. And if you come down here, you'll see that these selections where you can select, we are looking for free transform or transform. So I can see them, but I'm unable to select them. And that is because nothing has been selected. So the computer doesn't understand, or the program doesn't understand what you're trying to transform. So as a keyboard shortcut, if you want to select this whole image, which is what we are trying to do, the keyboard shortcut is Command A on a Mac. If you don't want to use the keyboard shortcut, I'm going to deselect it by clicking Command D. You can go to Select and All, and you will see this marquee around the entire image, also known as the little dancing ants. So once you see this around the image, you know that your image has been selected. Once it is selected, you can go to edit. Oh, I need to have a layer selected. Edit and then transform. So here is where we can rotate. Like I said, in many of your images, there was the instance in which the horizon line was not straight across the image. It was like crooked or slightly skewed, almost appeared as though, you know, just accidentally off in terms of how it was captured in camera. So we can slightly rotate our images to straighten things out by selecting this rotate tool. So once I click on that, I'm going to have a little bit of a different outline around my image. And you'll notice around each box here that appear in the middle and on the corners of each side of the image, my cursor changes to this little bowed out arrow, in which if I click and drag in either direction, I am able to, you know, slightly rotate my image. For the purposes of this photograph, I don't need to rotate it, so I am not going to, but that is how you would go about rotating an image if you needed to. So again, you can access that under Edit, Transform. You can also rotate things. You can flip things horizontally and vertically. So, sorry about that. So if you want to flip this horizontally so that the light, well, you know, it would just completely flip it. I don't know why you would want to do that, but in the instance that you think it makes a more attractive composition. And so simply under Edit and Transform, you have various different tools. You have Perspective tool, you have Skew tool, the Distort. These are many things that you can just sort of play around with on your images. I am going to go ahead and deselect my image. And the final thing that I want to go over with you guys, again, just very briefly, well, maybe I'll go over two more things actually. But in terms of retouching, so this can be helpful if there's something in your image that is very distracting. So let's just say, for the sake of this demonstration, I didn't want this line to be here. This power line, this specific power line, for whatever reason, I want it to go away. This tool that I'm about to demonstrate or show you is particularly helpful in editing or retouching portraits, images of people. And so the way that we will do this is by using this tool here that looks like a little stamper tool. It is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It is number 10 over here in the tools menu. And so we are going to go ahead, if you click down and hold, you'll see a little flyout menu for each and every tool, of which there are several different tools within each tool, and they all have their different purposes. For the sake of this demonstration, we are going to go with what should be default selected, and that is the clone stamp tool. So the way in which the clone stamp tool works is it essentially pulls information. Remember, we talked about how digital images are just a series of pixels. And so what it does is you tell it where to pull pixels from, and then you can tell it where to place those pixels. So again, this is particularly useful in editing or retouching images of people. Say there's a blemish on someone's face or a hair that is slightly out of line, and those types of things that you want to get rid of, or I guess we could say slight imperfections. But they can also be very helpful. Again, say I wanted to get rid of this power line. So first of all, the way in which, if you see my icon here, has turned into this outline of a circle, and that is the size in which you are telling your clone stamp tool to sample from. So the smaller the smaller the brush is, you are telling it to sample from a smaller area, which means essentially that it will be more compact. So I've made my brush, I might make it a little bit bigger. And so we're going to sample from the area that is closest to the area that we essentially want to clone stamp or cover up. And the way in which we sample is, if you notice, I'm going to hold down my Option key on my keyboard, and it turns the cursor into what kind of looks like a target. And so that target signifies you telling the cursor or the tool where to sample from in terms of pixels. So again, I will hover over an area close to the area where I want to cover up, or in an attempt to make it look as seamless as possible, and I will click and hold down my Option key and just click down with my cursor. So I have selected a color, and as you see, as I click, it's best to resample often. So what I'm doing here is I am holding down Option, I'm clicking in a localized area, and I am then telling those sampled pixels to place themselves over this power line as a means to make it quote unquote disappear. Again, it's important to resample often, as obviously the pixels in this image have changed greatly from here even down to here. So I try and resample every couple of clicks just to ensure that I am getting the closest accuracy of pixels to the designated place that I am trying to correct. So that is how you retouch or correct in terms of using the clone stamp tool. I am not going to do the entire power line, again, for the sake of this demonstration. But again, all I am doing with my clone stamp tool selected is I am holding down the Option key, I am clicking down with my cursor, and then you release the Option key and you click to replace those sampled pixels over the area that you are essentially trying to cover up. So like I said, I'm not going to finish this entire power line, but if we go ahead and zoom out, you can see here is the area in which the power line existed, and you can see that it is no longer there. So again, this tool is particularly helpful in, say, an image where there is something, say there was an airplane in the sky that I really didn't like, and it really, like, I really didn't want it to be a part of the picture. You could clone stamp out the airplane. Another tool that is even more helpful in terms of, say, working with portraits of people and blemishes or quote unquote imperfections, specifically on skin, or close-ups of, products, would be this tool, which is the Spot Healing Brush tool. And it's used in a very similar way. So again, here is my brush size. Say for whatever reason I wanted to get rid of these bolts. I'm not entirely too sure how well this will work, but it functions in the same way in which I tell it to sample from somewhere, so I'm going to make my brush size a little smaller. Say I just want this bolt to go away. Again, you use the same keyboard shortcuts. You can hold down the Option key and you select in an area here. And then where you want it to cover, you simply click and replace the content with the sampled pixels that you have selected. So you can imagine if we were working with, say, an image of a person and all of those little bolts that were on the bench were slight imperfections or something that we didn't want there. This tool is very helpful. You can see I will turn this layer off and on. The bolts and the power line now are not there anymore. So these two tools are particularly helpful in terms of what we refer to as like retouching, which is essentially getting rid of any flaws or imperfections within the image. So the last thing that I am going to show you guys is how to add any filters to your images. So again, I am going to, as always, duplicate my layer. And the way that you add any filters, and for the purposes of this particular assignment, I have expressed that I'm interested in you guys editing or retouching for corrective purposes. However, if you are interested in experimenting with filters and they add something to the image's intent, I am okay with you adding some degree of filter so long as it doesn't completely distort the image as it relates to reality. So anyways, that being said, if you want to experiment with filters in the future with the software of Photoshop, this is how you do it. Again, with your layer selected, you simply navigate to your menu up here, and you can drop down the menu for filter. So this is where all of your different filters live, and there are many different kinds of filters. You can spend some time going through them all. They also, within each filter, you are able to adjust essentially kind of the proportions or intensity. So one filter that can be helpful is the filters that add a sense of sharpness to your images. And I would encourage you to probably use the unsharp mask filter. So I will go ahead and show you how to add that. You simply select it. And like I said, each filter as you add it presents you with the options within the filter. So here I am able to adjust the amount, the radius, and the threshold. So I have the preview turned on. So as I adjust this, I'll just go ahead and zoom in a little bit just to give you guys a better view. Obviously, we would never want that to be that sharp. The default was 50. If I preview it off and on, it doesn't do that much, but again, you're not looking for anything crazy. If we adjust the radius ever so slightly, that enhances the visibility of the filter. And the threshold, again, is going to, depending on which way you tell it to go, going to either reduce or enhance the visibility of that filter. So I'll preview this off and on. I feel like that's a pretty good amount of sharpening, and we will select OK and zoom back out. And so even with it zoomed out, or I'll zoom slightly back in, turning the layer off and on, you're able to see kind of the effect that that filter added. As I mentioned, there's a ton of different filters that you can add. You can experiment with them and kind of play around with them. But again, for the purposes of this assignment specifically, we are not looking to add any crazy filters to the images, as they should be a close representation of reality. So those are just a few sort of very basic things to know how to do within Photoshop. I guess the other thing that I could potentially mention would be our selection tools in the event that you are looking to work with a specific or a singular area within your image. So these are our selection tools right here. They have the second, third, and fourth icons within the toolbar, and there are different kinds. These are your shape-specific selection tools. So here, if I have this selected, I can literally go into my image and draw a selection. So whatever is in this selection, say I go and add, have to be selected on layer. Say I want to add just an effect to where I have selected. This is how you would do that. So whatever you do, as you have this selection made, I canceled it, so it didn't save. But that's how you can do that should you ever want to do anything like that. So you have your rectangle, your elliptical, your single row, and your single column. These are called marquee tools. I'm going to deselect. Next, you have lasso, polygonal, and magnetic lasso tools. So this allows you to sort of more specifically make selections. The magnetic lasso is probably the kind of like easiest, in which it kind of is, it's content aware, and it's kind of smart and will follow things. Again, the more you click down, it gathers that information from the pixels, but all I'm doing is I'm doing a very rough selection here. I'm kind of tracing these, well, the area that I want to trace with my cursor, and again, clicking, and you'll see it's putting down all these different points. For the purposes of this, I'm going to go a little faster. Hold down my spacebar to get my move tool. Okay, and so to end a selection in using this tool, you will have to, I'm going to zoom in. This is my original, my first selection point. So I'll click on that and see, here we go. We got the dancing ants again. This is my selection that's been made. So again, say I want to add a blur to this specific area of the sky, Gaussian blur. General rule of thumb is kind of the best or least obnoxious blur tool. So if I click OK and then deselect, again, it's a really rough selection. I did not take my time at all, but that is how you would use that specific selection tool. And finally, below that, we have the magic wand tool, and what is brand new to Photoshop 2020 is this object selection tool, as well as the quick selection tool. They're all three pretty similar. I am most familiar with this magic wand tool in as I just mentioned, the object selection tool is brand new, but I assume they function the same. And so essentially how this tool works is as I click on things, and you should note that I'm clicking several times and to add to a selection. So I have already selected these things, this area, and if I want to add to this area, I will hold down my shift key, and you'll notice on my cursor, I'm presented with a plus sign. So that will add to the selection. So say I want to change that area of the image, which I have selected. Again, you know, you can really do anything to it. You can add a filter to it. You can change the color of it and so forth. But that is a very brief overview of selection tools, which gets into like a little bit more complexity in terms of Photoshop, but just as a very beginning or basis to understanding and using selection tools. Again, that's the second, third, and fourth icons in the toolbar. So that was just, again, a very brief introduction to some of the most basic tools that you should be using in Photoshop as you edit your images and retouch them in terms of correcting them. Again, I reviewed levels adjustments. I reviewed transforming the image through rotation. Again, there are other ways. I reviewed the clone stamp tool. I reviewed the spot healing brush tool. I reviewed adding filters. And I also reviewed the selection tools. So again, this should serve as a brief recap to what the lynda.com tutorials went over. And yeah, this is just a very basic introduction to working with images in Photoshop.